Thank you everyone for joining us. I think still more people streaming in, but we'll make a start. But thank you very much everybody for joining us for today's meetup and today's webinar. My name is David Spriggs. I'm the CEO of Info Exchange, and I'm the chair of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. And it's my pleasure to be the host and moderator for today's webinar. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're all joining from today. For me, that's the beautiful and unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And in the context of digital inclusion, really want to acknowledge the amazing work that's being done by the First Nations Digital Inclusion Advisory Group. We had them on our last meetup for ADIA. I want to acknowledge just the amazing work that group is continuing to do to progress digital inclusion in First Nations communities. Encourage you all as well today. Please feel free to put into the chat the lands that you're joining from in today's call. So welcome again everybody to our ADIA meetup for this month, which is all on the subject of the intersection of artificial intelligence and digital inclusion. I think a really exciting and timely topic. And I think really today what we're looking to do is kind of break through some of the hype. There's lots of discussion about artificial intelligence, but really kind of thinking about AI and generative AI in particular, and practically thinking about how is this technology being used in communities today, and what kind of insights can we share on, really where we are on a very early stage of the adoption of artificial intelligence across the community. We're really fortunate today to be joined by an amazing panel of speakers who really bring a diverse range of experience and perspectives on the subject. I'm going to ask each of them soon to speak to their areas of work. But by way of introduction, we've got Professor Michael Dejuani, who's a digital media researcher at Queensland University of Technology, focusing on all aspects of new media, digital literacy, digital inclusion, and children's digital lives. That keeps Michael very busy. He's a program leader at the Digital Media Research Centre and the chief investigator in the ARC Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. And is no stranger to many of you, and alongside all of those other roles, we're very privileged. He's also on our governance and strategy committee for the ADIA. So thank you for joining us, Michael. We've also got Kit McMahon. Kit's the CEO of Women's Health in the Southeast, part of a network of women's health services across Victoria that provide promotion, advocacy, support, and education services. Kit has 2 decades of experience across education, training, and not-for-profits. Says here where she has consistently and passionately advocated for gender equality, empowering women and girls. And it is that passionate advocacy that I love in Kit, and hopefully we will hear some of today on the panel. And outside of women's health in the Southeast, Kit also serves on the boards of Women in Adult and Vocational Education and also the Tradeswomen Australia Group. And then finally, delighted to have with us Anisha. Thank you for joining us, Anisha. Anisha is a Melbourne-based social worker who's focusing on engaging with culturally and linguistically diverse youth and young people. It's a new role for Anisha and expands on her earlier work as an educator in Nepal. And she brings some incredible lived experience from that transition from Nepal into Australia in 2020. Anisha completed her Masters of Social Work at the Australian College of Applied Professions, and has undertaken a placement at Yarraville Community Centre, which is where we were really fortunate to be introduced by Patricia at Yarraville Community Centre to Anisha. So welcome and thank you to all our panelists for being so generous with your time and joining us today. A little bit of housekeeping to get us started. Today's session's being recorded. It will be available after the event today in the next edition of the ADIA newsletter. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter. Caitlin will add into the Zoom chat how you can subscribe to the newsletter. As I say, we'll start today by hearing from each of our panelists, and then we'll get into Q&A. But for those of us who have joined before, you'd know we really encourage lots of chat and Q&A while you're hearing from our speakers. So please don't wait till the end to put in your questions. If you've got questions or comments, please use the chat as we go through. Some of them we can even answer as we go, and certainly we'll have lots of time to pick up on audience questions as part of the meetup. Just when you do use the chat, make sure you have the chat settings set to everyone. When you click down on the 2 in the chat, you can choose everyone, and that just makes sure your message is being shared with the entire group. So before we get into today's topic, just a little bit about the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance in case you haven't joined one of our meetups before. So we were established in 2017, very much with an action orientation to how can we accelerate progress on digital inclusion across the community. Today, we've got over 500 business, government, academic, and community organisations all working together to accelerate progress. What I love about the Alliance and today's meetup is we have such a broad range of perspectives that come into that, from people working in federal and state governments through to people working in large corporates and tech companies and telcos, people working right across the community sector, bringing in the academic perspective, and then people working in amazing grassroots community organisations like neighbourhood houses and libraries, for example. And I think that's really where some of the magic happens in the discussions that we can have. Our vision at ADIA is clearly a digitally inclusive Australia. That's not technology for technology's sake. That is to help make sure that everybody that wants to can participate fully in the digital world, which really these days means fully participating in society and the broader economy. We kind of work across 3 pillars on affordable access, accessibility, and then a critical piece around ability and skills to participate. Why do we do this? I'm sure people on this call don't need to be reminded, but it's close to 25% of the Australian population in the last Australian Digital Inclusion Index that remain digitally excluded. So we've still got a lot of work to do. But coming on to today's topic, we've seen a huge rise in artificial intelligence over the last kind of year or so. It's hard to pick up a newspaper. Picking up a newspaper sounds very old school, but it's hard to pick up a paper or have a conversation with anyone these days where the topic of AI doesn't come up. And I guess from a digital inclusion perspective, yes, we're very focused on helping make sure that we have the skills and enablement within the community, and so that the rise of artificial intelligence doesn't further divide and cause further issues from a digital inclusion perspective. But today we also wanted to focus on, I guess, where artificial intelligence, and particularly generative artificial intelligence, is being used in a positive way, and how it's enabling community members across the country. And that's one of the pieces that I think is really exciting. And then we kind of cut through the hype, and you can actually think about, try, test, and learn. And kind of how can we share across the community on some of the positive ways that Gen AI is being used. But certainly enough from me. Keen to get us started. So we're going to hear from Michael Desuani first. And you've seen, I guess, in your career, Michael, an enormous explosion of digital technologies over the years, and you might argue that artificial intelligence is just the latest on that. But really keen to hear from you and get your reflections on, what is the take up of this technology across the communities, and what are some of the things we should be aware of from a research perspective. So thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks so much, David. And I'm joining from lands of the Turrbal and Yagara today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and recognise that where my university is, QUT, has always been a place of teaching, research, and learning, and we remain on unceded lands as well. So yeah, David, look, absolutely, AI, generative AI. I don't think actually it is just another technology. I think we will look back on this AI moment, in future and say that it really was a kind of watershed moment, in some respects akin to the introduction of the internet. I think it's actually quite a revolutionary moment in lots of ways. But I think that there is absolutely some, continuities in the story of how we need to think about what that means for our society and what it means for people who um, are on the wrong end of digital inclusion. And so I'm certainly in my presentation today, I will talk. I'm kind of the negative person on the panel, I think. I'm going to kind of talk a fair bit about the things we need to be thinking about. But I know that Kit and Anisha are going to be talking about, some of the real opportunities with generative AI as well. And I don't want to come across as a negative person. In general, I think I'm an optimist in relation to technology, and I think over time we will absolutely see that generative AI does help many people to be included and to participate in society and to, achieve a whole bunch of things that they were previously not able to achieve. And I think that includes disadvantaged groups, and it includes people who are currently digitally excluded. But at the same time, I think we need to be very aware of the challenges, and that we need to be, we need to really be thinking about how we advocate for those who are less included currently. We need to think about how to make sure that we provide people with the necessary training and educational opportunities and so on to develop the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to take advantage of generative AI. So, as you said, David, we have many Australians who are still digitally excluded. So, if you say that around 10% are quite extremely digitally excluded, then, that's over 2 million Australians. And then if you add another 15 or 20% or so, it's probably just under 10 million Australians who are quite digitally excluded. And I guess in my work, I'm particularly focused on low-income families and the implications of digital inclusion and exclusion for children and their experiences of schooling and learning. And we have been working on a large national research project where we've been thinking about low-income families, working with low-income families around the country to look at all of the ways that they experience digital inclusion and exclusion, and the various ways in which they're finding opportunities in the community for support. And so we know from that work and just from the broader kind of research that's out there that, low-income students are disadvantaged at school currently. When we see things like the NAPLAN ICT tests that are done every few years, we see that low-income students are often well behind their better-off peers, sometimes up to a couple of years behind their better-off peers in terms of digital skills. And we know that many low-income students don't have access to a laptop or desktop computer, for instance, at home. And may not get access at school now either, because in many schools who may have touchscreen policies, for instance, it may be the case that you can go all the way through your primary schooling and never access a traditional computer, which means that you don't necessarily develop keyboard and mouse skills. You don't necessarily know how to use file management systems and so on. So you might be proficient on a touchscreen device, but that there are limitations to what that allows you to do still. And so it's kind of in this context that I want to think about generative AI and what it means in terms of low-income students in particular, having those opportunities to take advantage of generative AI. And I think we need to think about, generative AI can be both a kind of, it's kind of strange in the sense that it can be both a low-end technology and can be quite accessible, or it can be a very advanced technology, depending on how you use it. So we know that generative AI over time and already is being incorporated into just typical productivity software. So we know, with Microsoft's Copilot, for instance, that increasingly in the latest versions of Windows, that you'll just be using PowerPoint, and generative AI will be built into PowerPoint to help you make images and things like that. So we know that this is going to kind of be more and more the way that generative AI is introduced into society. But at the same time, there are very particular tools that you can use very purposefully. And some of those, you need quite advanced skills to be able to use them effectively and to take advantage of them. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as I go on today as well. So I guess what I'm saying is that overall, there's the danger that we have a deepening digital divide with a new technology like generative AI. And partly to evidence this, I guess, I want to talk about some findings from a survey that I've had the privilege to be part of conducting. So this is the National Adult Media Literacy Survey that was conducted earlier this year, led by Associate Professor Tanya Notley at Western Sydney University. And this work, we surveyed 4,000 adult Australians about a whole range of different aspects of how they use the media, the kind of media abilities and confidence that they have, and the attitudes that they have towards the media and issues within the media. And as part of that survey this year, we asked a subset of questions about generative AI and its uptake in Australian society. And Caitlin, I might ask you to just pop into the chat now the statistics that I have for you. So in this work, we asked this small number of questions about generative AI, and there were really some quite surprising findings from this work. So the first thing to say is that despite the hype, fewer Australians are using generative AI than we might expect. So in terms of text-based generative AI, so like ChatGPT, it was only about 30% who had used that at all. And then only about 16% have used image-based generative AI tools like, say, Midjourney. So it's still actually the minority of people in the country who are using generative AI at all. But then when we dig deeper and we talk about those on low incomes, those with lower levels of education, people who are living regionally and so on, so all of the typical markers that we would think about related to digital inclusion, we see that the impacts of digital exclusion. So for those living on a low income, it's only about 7% who use generative AI regularly, as opposed to 19% who are living on higher incomes. For those with a low education, it's only about 4% who used text-based regularly, so 13% who have high levels of education. And then for people living in regional Australia, it's only about 9% who use text-based generative AI regularly. And then for those who have a low level of media ability confidence, which we measured in different ways in this survey, only about 3% of those folks are using text-based generative AI regularly. So I think from these statistics, we really do see some kind of evidence of who is and who isn't, taking up this opportunity. And more, I suppose more importantly, in some respects, we kind of see this cycle of reinforcement that happens. So those people who are on low incomes, less educated and so on, who are not using generative AI, we also see that they use media less overall. We see that their levels of media confidence overall are lower. And so then they're less likely to try out new things. And certainly we see that in kind of the attitudes that come through towards generative AI as well. So with those on a low level of education, 29% have strongly negative sentiment towards generative AI, whereas that's only 13% for those on a high income. And for those on a low income as well, the figures are the same for on a low income, 29% having that strong negative sentiment towards generative AI. And then just as a global kind of figure, it's only about 5% of adult Australians who say that they feel confident using generative AI, which is quite a small percentage actually. So again, I told you I'd be the kind of negative person on the panel, but I think it's kind of important to have this kind of background because it puts things into perspective. Now I'm just going to finish off just with another minute or two to talk about what we know about the kind of skills and knowledge that relate to AI and digital inclusion. So I would argue that there's a kind of hierarchy of skill and knowledge that relates to how we might think about generative AI and the skills required to use it. So as I was kind of hinting at earlier, you absolutely need to have those basic computer skills to be able to use generative AI really productively, and particularly if you want to use advanced versions of generative AI, like advanced image generation and so on, you have to have basic computer skills. And we know some people who are digitally excluded don't. Increasingly, you have to really have an understanding of the relationship between traditional software and integrated AI features. And that's going to become more and more the case, I think. So in a sense, it's possible that our everyday productivity software will become slightly more complicated to use once generative AI features are built in. Absolutely, you need to be effective at using prompts to generate content and to apply additional prompts to refine results. So you might have heard of this term prompt crafting. It's now become quite important to be able to, craft prompts effectively to get AI to do things for you that you would like it to do. And there's definitely a relationship between prompting and traditional literacy. If you don't know how to phrase things well, using prompts, or if the tool that you're using is, biased towards English language prompts, then that's going to be a problem in terms of your ability to get what you want out of the tool. There are some other things, I'm aware of time, there are some other things I could go on to talk about as well, but I might stop in just briefly. But look, I would point to media literacy. I would point to the ability to be able to recognize, content that's produced using generative AI, some of the issues that relate to misinformation, for instance, that are also challenging in this new media environment where generative AI is so prevalent. And we do always need to remember that being literate is not just about the skills to read and to do, but to be critically reflective about what you're reading and the ability to recognize, stuff that's trustworthy as opposed to stuff that's not so trustworthy. But I think I might leave it there because there's plenty more to say, and I can come back to talking about some of the other stuff in Q&A. Thanks, David.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Michael. And no, I don't think you're being negative at all. I think you're setting some really useful context for us, because I think those of us that work in this space, you can quickly make the assumption that everybody's out there using these tools. And I think really concerning as well that, as your research is showing, that in this sort of early stage, we're already seeing those gaps form along the same lines that we see in broader digital inclusion around level of income and level of education and regional areas, for example. So, really, really good context. And I love this whole discussion that goes on now about prompt crafting and prompt engineering. Like, if this technology is so fantastic, can't we just ask the questions? Why do we have to think about how we do this? But some great context, and we'll pick up more. Great to see some comments in the chat. Encourage everyone to keep putting in questions and comments through the chat. Zane had a good question on the fact that this is published research, and somebody's already put the link into the chat. So thank you. But moving on now to Kit, and Kit would love to kind of hear some of your experience in the community and how some of these tools are being used by members of the community that you're seeing. So over to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks to the ADIA for this opportunity. And Michael, the sharing of your knowledge, it's sort of resonating in me. So, I apologize if I seem quite mentally distracted, but I'm still working through what you said. So rich, thank you. So everyone, my name's Kit McMahon. I come from an organisation called Women's Health in the Southeast. And just to give you some context on this moment, I come to this conversation as a person whose job is a CEO and whose job is to help the staff that she supports to address intersectional and often gendered barriers to health and wellbeing in the southern parts of Melbourne. So for myself, I come to the conversation about AI from that perspective. I hope I can be positive, Michael. I may not be. So to help me and this conversation, I guess one of the things I wanted to do was to encourage myself to use the best of time. So I hope you don't mind, I've got a bit of a slide presentation. And the first thing I want to go to is sort of talk about the reality of, I'll probably come at it different to Michael. Michael talks about the moment of AI. I think I come to this from seeing a whole range of innovations and technologies that have emancipated women and those facing compounding forms of intersectional disadvantage. Not only what we think of as hard tech, but also other innovations. The invention of penicillin, of the printing press, of immunizations, vaccines. For women, the pill, contraception has been incredibly transformative as well. But in my own family, I reflect on things like the microwave, whom I've advised, even from one of my staff was told by one of her parents that if she uses the microwave, it would make her infertile when they first got one. And for my own mother, the story of the washing machine, whilst a small piece of technology may be, enabled her to actually stop using a copper in the heat of the Queensland sun and gave her more time. But let's also think about social innovation, because these are the things that from an intersectional barrier, and I know Anisha as a social worker understands this as well, the 1984 Sex Discrimination Act was profoundly transformative for so many people in our country. The Charter of Human Rights, the UN, the introduction globally of things like the International Criminal Court. And I know there we've got some pictures there of 1975, but in my family, the advent of even no-fault divorce, the establishment of Medicare and Medibank, and let's not forget for First Nations, the act of walking off the hill by the First Nations people will have transformative effects across generations. So it's from that perspective that I come to this question of AI. And before I share that experience, can I just ask us to consider the following? That I also come to this from a reality of working in feminised organisations that are under-resourced, underpaid, and are full of volunteerism. And of those jobs, there's a perpetuation of the payback as well. That the lived experience of migrant and refugee women is a story of compounding and ongoing disadvantage. And that we have growing forms of disadvantage. And we need to centre the lived experience of the people whose lives we seek to transform if we are to understand the impact of the innovation. So with that, the story I share in terms of AI in my world is it's actually a moment of enabling human rights. For health equity, the migrant, the women facing compounding forms of disadvantage, use AI to help them understand health information. I don't know if anyone here who speaks English as their first language and has got a couple of degrees and a bit of privilege like I do, but I find government department information sites about health quite complex at the best of times. So you can imagine a woman whose fifth language is English, understanding that, well, they use AI to help them convert this stuff into not only Dari, but simple language, uncomplicated technical language in Dari. To understand government forms, to help them complete even court forms or how to register to vote. Truly emancipatory moments. For economic equity, I know that there are women who are trying to set up their own small businesses in southern Melbourne, who, like for catering business, who use AI to help them write the social media posts so that they can get businesses literally to feed their families. Literally to feed their families. And I also know that amongst the range of organisations that I am part of and a member of, who are often under-resourced, are just run by chairs, the local community organisations. For them, AI levels the playing field in terms of being able to compete in a very noisy lobbying environment to advance their messages, that lets them understand how you write a brief to speak to a minister, that lets them generate the letter to their members, that lets them write the media release when that's not their core skill. It gives them the research department that they did not have. It gives them the comms teams that they did not have. And the other story that I'm really happy to share is the way that AI helps many women, particularly those women who are also facing the inability, their mobility is challenged through disability, through isolation, to access things like justice, to understand and help them understand their legal rights with regard to rental agreements, to help access complex websites to do with regulation and law. That is the story of AI in my experience of it. And I put this challenge to us to consider the following. Whose stories are we centering at the moment in our debates publicly about AI? I would argue to you that it is very much limited because the power over those conversations is limited to a particular voice. The tech sector, the voice is dominated by, I will say, it's gendered. It is actually, if you look at the newspapers about who is driving the debate about the cautious of AI, it is dominated by men. It's dominated by high amounts of capital and power. And there are a disproportionate number of male voices and limited in male experience, I would say, in the tech and AI research. So the development of AI is centered around a narrative of a certain type of lived experience in the world. And you know I'm not saying anything here that is unusual. Earlier today, I was talking to one of my staff. I'm very lucky to have a woman here who fled Afghanistan for a whole range of reasons, and she works with us. And she was describing to me about how she uses AI, and she is building herself a future by educating herself. I think English is her fifth or sixth language. And she was using AI to help her understand her coursework. And she said to me, and Kit, my teacher does not like me doing it. And I wonder why. Why is it about this person who is trying to make the way in the world? Why would you not want to give them the tools that it would empower their future? Why would you want to take away from them a tool that could help them understand something that is complex, that is not written in the language of their own journey, but also maybe was poorly designed in the first place? And the only reason I can come to again and again is because we have no interest in empowering those who are disempowered because of the systems around them. So I just ask us, when we consider AI policy for the future, to centre the voices of those who are without power, and to ask them how they use this technology and put it within the context of generations of technological and social innovation that at its heart seeks to empower and create equal and justice in the world. that's probably all I wanted to say, David, and I'm happy to leave it there and hand it over to my colleagues.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Kit. That was so rich, and some great comments coming through in the chat there as well, particularly your slide on human rights and AI. A good comment from Beth there as well, who's somebody working in this space. You know, that and a lot of the people working in the policy space are women, but your comments are very well made around the gendered, particularly the gendered origins of a lot of the development of this technology. And I think a huge thank you on behalf of all of us, if you could pass back to, sounds like that lovely lady in your team from Afghanistan, for being willing to share her story through you. And I think we very much appreciate that. So thank you. Please pass on our thanks. So moving now to Anisha, really looking forward to hearing from you, Anisha, and just some of your reflections on the way that AI tools are helping in kind of work and life environments, and potentially also some of the challenges that you're seeing in community.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, David, for your insightful introduction before. I would like to start by extending my gratitude to my fellow panelists, Michael and Kate. That was a wonderful start by setting the panel and sharing a wonderful experience around. I feel so rich with so many of information and knowledge around using AI. I would also like to take a moment to thank my supervisor, my role model, Patricia Shaka, who's sitting right next to me today. You want to come and say hi? Yep, hi, yes. If it was not for her belief and her encouragement, trust me, I would not be here today. So thank you, Patricia. And also, I would like to thank our outstanding organizer, Caitlin and Esther there, and the incredible team of ADIA for bringing all of us together here. And I feel so blessed and so grateful to be part of this incredible panel today. And also, before starting, David, I would like to, I must say that was a very comprehensive acknowledgement of country. And we are here today on the land of Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and would like to pay my respect to their unique values and cultures that deepen and enriches the lives of our nations and communities. I must say it's a privilege to be able to work and share knowledge in this incredible land, which is rich with culture and rich history. And I also believe that it's all of our responsibility to strengthen this land. And no wonder we all are gathered here today to discuss about how to create an inclusive community and environment, not only with the help of cultures, but also with the help of digital tools. I found this topic quite interesting, so thank you. It's wonderful to be here. To start a little bit about myself, because I am here to share most of my self-reflection around using AI, how it helped my way through my study and work in Australia. So my perspective is going to be completely different from what Kit and Michael delivered through all those researches. So let's get started. So I'm originally from Nepal, and for those of you who may not be familiar with the country, trust me, it's a very beautiful country with great mountains and diverse cultures. However, if I have to talk about Nepal in context of digital perspective, which is the main topic for today, sadly, Nepal's digital infrastructure was quite basic when I grew up. Which means that access to internet and modern telecommunication was very limited, especially in remote areas. And when I was young, I had limited access to computers, even though I went to private school. So I never did my assignments online, but I would say just one time when I was doing my final year of Bachelor in Social Work back in Nepal, and it was about that project report that I had to do for the field trip that we all went on for the social work projects. So I was pretty anxious because I was so unconfident about using computers, especially Word documents, and I felt so stressed. And even if I opened Microsoft Documents, the Word document, somehow I would find to struggle finding my way around what would be the good format for the report, finding that font size, adjusting it, or or even like putting the page numbers, which was pretty basic, but I didn't know how to find any of those. But luckily, with the help of my dear friends and also the helpful librarian at that time, I submitted my assignment, and so relieved that I do not have to do it again. But not until I came to Australia. As we all know how digitally advanced country Australia is. So I came to Australia in 2020 to pursue my higher studies in digital work. Definitely not a good time to come to Australia in 2020, but it is what it is. So when I came to Australia, it was not only a cultural shock for me, but also a digital shock, a huge digital shock. Being from a country where online systems are rarely used and digital tools are only limited to, I would say, maybe Google or YouTube, but also not in everyone's and everyday's lives, I found the Australian digital world quite challenging. Because as we all know here in Australia, even if you go shopping, to banking transactions, to submitting assignments, or even reading books and to performing huge business tasks, everything was so digitalized, and it got more digitalized with the rising hit of COVID. Okay, so I felt very vulnerable. I felt I cannot adapt to this country or no. But I think what helped me was my access to internet. I had a smartphone and luckily access to my brother's laptop. So eventually I had time to learn at home during COVID. So I enjoyed that time learning great tools about how to use Word documents and how to make presentations in MS PowerPoint. So eventually I learned and I adapted through different trials and errors. But something I would say that I found as a game changer was when I knew how to use my digital tools effectively. When saying that, what I mean is I used to use Google and YouTube before as well back in Nepal, but it used to be mostly for that entertainment purpose, like watching videos or movies or playing games. But now I know how to use it as a weapon to excel my knowledge and skills. This is because when I was studying, I used different digital tools, for example, or websites. So I used Google Scholar for authentic research articles that I used to use in my assignments. I used Canva to create an engaging template for presentations, and that really helped me a lot in my presentations. And among all of that, that one tool I am so glad that I found it was Grammarly. Most of you might already be aware of what Grammarly is. It's become so widespread nowadays. For me, for someone who is not from English speaking background, Grammarly helped me a lot. It not only helped me to correct my grammar, but also my spellings, my punctuations, phrasing the sentences. It would also suggest you synonym or words that better suit the content. So it really made me confident, I would say, even if I'm texting my friends or emailing my professor. Before that, I used to spend lots of time Googling, even if I had to write a simple email to my colleague or my professor. So that was pretty time consuming. And the other thing was, I don't know how many of you can agree with me, maybe some migrants or students there, that I used to be so scared to put my thoughts into words because I used to have these thoughts, ideas, or feelings in my head. And then when I used to put it in the word, it would come as completely different, like disaster. So I used to be so anxious, but because English is, I think, probably my third language. But Grammarly helped me a lot, so thankful for that. And with my work, I would say Canva really helped me to prepare my resume and cover letter, which just made it look simple yet creative. So I did not have to worry much about the templates because they also provide you with free templates, so you don't have to buy it. So it's not compulsory. So a little bit reflection about why I started using it, because it just made my work so easier and saved my time. It's been a valuable resources, but I was using it without knowing about its AI component. And the other thing I would like to add is it did not only make me feel equipped and confident, but I also felt like I am now part of Australia's digital world. Yes. And I feel like I'm competent enough for the Australian work industry. So you can tell from my experience about how that transition happened from a sense of knowing nothing and feeling completely isolated in this different lands, having no connections, to that sense of feeling confident or gaining that sense of belonging. And that was only possible because of the help of digital tools. And again, I do not have much information about generative AI because I did heard about ChatGPT from my friends. But again, I thought, oh, it just used to do the homeworks or this kind of stuff, you know? And I finished my degree, so I was like, oh, it's no use to me. But then again, I think Patricia came to me about this panel discussion, and she made me aware about, sorry about that. She made me aware about how people are using ChatGPT nowadays to help them with everything in their day-to-day lives. And then I started using ChatGPT, and I'm finding it incredibly helpful, guys. I think everyone who are struggling out there with writing emails or finding the specific, answers, because sometimes Google just give you that general overview, and then it's hard to find that one answer. I think ChatGPT really gives you that broad answer with whatever you are struggling. And before finishing my self-reflection, David, I would just like to close my conversation here by saying that for someone like me who had like I would say proficient English and limited access to digital tools, I still felt so vulnerable. So I can't help but imagine how it might be for those people who were less disadvantaged or less privileged than me. So I think by employing AI, we can create that inclusive and more supportive environment together that can help migrant peoples or everybody to thrive in their lives and work. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anisha, and there's lots of lovely comments coming through. I'll second what Bernard said there in the chat, but thank you so much for sharing your life experience with us and being so generous with that sharing. I can only imagine not just the cultural shock, but that digital shock coming to Australia, and particularly in 2020, which particularly for those of us here in Melbourne, kind of remember those periods of lockdown. So. What an incredible story, and incredible to hear about all of those different tools that you've been using as well. And for English as your third language, I wouldn't have known. You're more articulate than I am, and I have English as a first and only predominant language. So thank you, you're just incredible. So keen to open it up to questions. If people want to put questions in the chat, you can also use the Q&A box. Please put your questions in. I thought I might go back to Michael first. There's been some comments in the chat just how rich this discussion has been about bringing in the kind of the human voice and the lived experience. And so just wanted to ask you, Michael, in terms of out of your research, whether there were particular insights you had on different cohorts and their use of AI and how people are using it, and whether there's any surprises in there that people might not have thought of, and some of the cohorts using AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've already touched on it, David, in the sense of, talking about how we see this demographic or socio-demographic kind of difference in terms of who might be taking up AI and who's not taking up AI quite as rapidly and so on. And I think, I just wanted to, I guess, reinforce the point that it's this, what I guess as a researcher, what worries me the most is this kind of cycle of reinforcement that occurs where if you don't know about something, if you've never been introduced to it, if you don't know what its usefulness might be, then you might not have the curiosity to try it out, and therefore, you just don't ever start to take it up. And so I think there is some evidence in our survey data for that. And certainly, you know, in the ethnographic work that we've done with low-income families and so on, we see incredible stories of people doing all sorts of interesting and productive things with technologies, but they don't know what they don't know necessarily. People don't necessarily, if you don't know that a particular tool can achieve something for you, then that in and of itself becomes a barrier. And I guess the other thing that I, really think increasingly about is, how skills and knowledge is not just about those mechanical how-to things. It's absolutely about these more social and critical questions, and about the ability to be able to question something, or the ability to know when it's ethically responsible to create. I mean, so what generative AI allows you to do, of course, is to create new stuff and to then circulate that stuff. And so thinking carefully about the ethical issues related to that, I think, are really important. And of course, this relates more broadly to how we all, participate on social media generally. So if we've got the ability to create sophisticated stuff, maybe stuff that looks very convincing and very realistic, and we've also got the platforms to distribute it to the whole world, then, all of us are in that position of needing to understand, the responsibility that's in our hands. And that's absolutely part of the literacy and the skills and knowledge that relate to generative AI that we need to be talking about. So it's quite complex in terms of the layers of things that we need to be thinking about, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just to pick up quickly, Catherine's just put into the chat just while we've got you. Well, first of all, a really good comment from Catherine that when we're talking about technologies like Grammarly and Google Scholar, for example, you're talking about Anisha and Canva. Clearly, there's a lot of AI under those products as well. But whether you want to comment, Michael, on the question around, do you see differences in age groups, and is that kind of myth or reality that it's younger people making a lot more use of these tools than others?
Yeah, no, definitely. I didn't, in talking about the different groups, I didn't talk about age, but absolutely, if you go and have a look at the report, you'll see that because we talked about adults, so we started at 18, but those in the 18 to kind of 24 category are far more likely to be experimenting with these tools and using these tools than older groups, for sure. So look, I think that teaching at a university, we see a lot of our students using generative AI for a whole host of reasons that are often very, very productive. So I think often younger people who are at school, or who are in higher education and training, or at university, perhaps have more reason for trying things out, just because it might be useful for their studies. One of the really interesting things that came up in the survey, though, was that people didn't say that they were necessarily using generative AI for work. So that wasn't necessarily one of the big things that was incentivizing them to use generative AI, which we were a bit surprised about, actually.
Fantastic, thank you. I was wondering if we can come back to Anisha. So you kind of picked there, Michael, on kind of that curiosity piece as being absolutely critical. But can be balanced, I guess, with what Kit was saying before around sometimes stigma and shame. And that was a terrible story about someone using the technology in a really empowering way, and then the person leading the course to say, "Oh, I'm not sure you should be using that tech." But Anisha, whether you can comment on that sort of stigma and shame that people might feel, kind of how you can counter that, and how do you encourage that kind of try, test, and learn for exactly what you were talking about in your own experience of, well, ChatGPT, let's just give it a go and see what it might be useful for. Whether you've got any comments on how to encourage people in that environment.
Well, I think, David, that's an excellent question and also a very important one, because it touches on that important, very critical issue that lots of people who comes to Australia, although they are migrants or refugees or seeking asylum, they are experiencing nowadays in regard to accepting AI. So I think it's really important for us to understand what causes that barrier for them to accept AI. And for people, especially for people from culturally and linguistically diverse background, I think it could be the matter of a cultural thing as well. So I think we could really be mindful about those stigma around using AI. It is evident through many researches that most of the people, they might fear that using AI could be seen as a sign of weakness or lack of creativity or competency when they're working. So they try not using AI. But also, there could be those challenging groups, especially the older people who have, I wouldn't say especially older people, but those people who have lower level of trust in technology and have like sort of kind their own traditional belief around AI. I think they fear being judged when they start using AI. So I think there is that stigma around, and that can be very personal as well. The other stigma, I think it really resonates with what I am saying, is there is this big gap between technology and people, again, especially from older groups. And, they might perceive AI as very complex, difficult, something that they cannot do never. So we need to bridge this digital divide. For example, I remember even when Facebook was new in Nepal, my parents, like many parents, were worried that it's going to be a negative influence among us as children. And but if you see now, surprisingly, it's become so common. Even my parents use Facebook so commonly that it has almost become inseparable part of their lives. So I could see the transition, and maybe it's also because Facebook provided that safe space for people to come and share and express their interests, skills, ideas, and more of that maybe because they can connect with people from every nook and corner of the world. So I think Facebook has gained that confidence among people. So I think we just need to do same with AI tools. And that hesitancy around AI could be addressed by building that sense of trust. And again, this could be done when people are exposed to digital tools. The more they want to be exposed, the more they want to know. And I think it's really important for them to navigate their way around AI so they can have more familiarity and comfort. I did mention I did learn by using trials and errors method in my life, but I did know basic knowledge about English and what I was doing in computer. But then most of the people who have never used computer or who do not speak English or write in English, and especially for those people who are not able to read and write in their own language, it's a great, great, great barrier. So I think it's what we can do is providing that one-to-one support, giving that space for them to come and express their stigma around using AI can really help bridge that gaps. While I'm talking about one-to-one support, I would also like to share this small examples about the program that Yarraville Community Centre here in Yarraville, Melbourne did this year. And this was a great initiative, the program called Digital Sisters AI for Good. So as the name entails, Digital Sisters, the program was intended for women from culturally and diverse backgrounds who were especially migrants and refugees. So they had 43 participants coming to the centers to access digital knowledge. And also, I don't want to forget to mention that they came from 20 diverse countries, mostly aged between 18 to 50 years old. And they came here to build their skills and confidence in using emerging technologies like AI and Gen AI. So with the help of 2 digital mentors and my supervisor, Patricia herself, they provided one-to-one sessions with tailored support. Which I mean is, for example, if people had issue in language things, so we really help them to understand the Google tools like Google's Translator, where they can use this app for text or translate the whole website, so which they found very useful. The other example would be, sorry, I just have to mention this, that most of the people, 70%, more than 70% came here because they wanted to improve their language skills. So they want to improve their listening, writing, and reading in English skills. So our helpful mentors guided them through the British Council websites, how they can access free tools and resources and enjoy it in their free time. So I think that was an incredible job did by Yarraville Community Center. And there's no surprise, there are many community centers or adult learning centers. They are doing this job. And I think there should be more of this kind of programs running. The other thing I would say was I would like to also touch a little bit on this ethical concern, which Michael was talking before, that how people are concerned about, and I think it's pretty common in developing countries like Nepal that you hear stories like AI is taking away your jobs, or, it's going to automate everything. There will be no jobs for people here. So it might be true in some cases, but I think it's really important for people to realize that it is also generating more jobs and opportunities for them, and really addressing their fear about AI taking their jobs. More of that, I think, having that sense of digital tools and how to use it effectively can be done by digital empowerment. So no doubt AI has the potential to improve efficiency among different fields, but only if we know how to use it. So helping those digitally excluded people to understand how they can take this wealth of opportunities or advantages from these AI tools like ChatGPT or Grammarly or Canva, I think it will really help to bridge that stigma around using digital tools.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anisha. And you were so right on that importance of the one-to-one support, and that amazing work that organisations like the Yarraville Community Centre are doing. It was lovely to see you on camera for a minute before, Patricia. But I think just so important to look at that importance of one-to-one supports. I'm wondering whether you want to come in on that issue again of kind of the stigma, and I think what Anisha just said about it's seen as a weakness by some people to use these technologies and the judgment that can come with it. Yeah, whether you want to talk some more to what you've seen in that area.
Thank you. I'm just responding to Alicia's great comment. The chat's amazing, by the way.
It is.
Loving
Thank
the
you,
chat.
everyone.
Wow, what a great group of people.
And you might want to pick up Alicia's piece on that fear of breaking something as well, which comes into all of that.
Yeah, beautiful. And Alicia, I think that the story that Alicia says is an important one to listen to. So I'm going to try and loop in the two if I can. I think the story for me is not actually a question about stigma of AI, but stigma around change. I'm often struck, and I'm not a tech guru, I use it all the time. I've got 4 screens in front of me. I've got about 16 apps open at the moment, right? I'm not afraid. I'm one of these people who's privileged to, one of those people, Michael, who your evidence proves the point, right? I'm struck how often the stories of change start being about the thing, the pill, the washing machine, the microwave, the baby formula, right? And then when we get used to it, we can then lift our heads and go, actually, the story is not about stigma of the AI, but stigma of the change. But to get to the moment of our conversation and the alignment to the change piece, and for Alicia's group that she's caring for, it starts by remembering about how we do address stigma in our society. And it's all those things we know. right? So I'm not telling anyone on this call anything that you don't know. It starts with someone having the conversation and calling out and making the leadership of calling it out. At its best practice, it actually starts with centering the lived experience. And I do think it starts with a human rights framework. For me, Michael, that's the ethical framework, right? Does this deliver a human rights outcome? What I've noticed, and I think what resonated for me when we were prepping for this with ADIA, was the stigma. I too have noticed that the women I work with hide that they're using it. And the reason they hide it is because they're afraid they'll be seen as even lesser than they're currently seen, that they'll be seen as cheating the system. And what we know is that stigma is drawn by the way that the society and systems around them talk about it. So if I go back to my colleague and her experience of education and even ask Anisha to comment on this, if you listen to the hegemony at the moment that's talked about when it comes to AI and education, it's with the assumption that people are using it to cheat. Now, that is calling people cheaters. That is telling people that they're failures. When in fact, we know the bulk of people don't cheat, right? So if we come at this from a strengths-based approach, not by talking about what's wrong with people in our assumptions, and I think that's a bulk of what we do. You know, that's not going to work because people, you know, and I'm fascinated. I sit, you know, I'm on Wave and I sit in discussions about education policy, and the AI stuff fascinates me at the moment because it's all about, oh, people are going to cheat on there. But we don't ask what's driving our assumptions of people about that. And we don't ask, well, what's the lived experience of students that makes us think that that might happen? It's probably more to do with the poverty environment that they're in than the AI, right? So again, I think reducing the stigma is coming back to the ethical framework around human rights. What is the lived experience? We need to give ourselves time. Moore's law is alive and well. The world's getting faster and more intense, right? We need to find the space. And I think the other thing I would say is it's not about AI. AI gives us, is the trigger for the conversation of things. But we've got to get looking around it, just like we did with the pill. I did a piece of work recently with a tourism organisation in Victoria that has a steam train as part of its experience. When steam trains were first introduced, the myth was that women couldn't ride them because their uteruses would fly out of their body. And that was the very real belief at the time. Now, clearly we look back at, oh, those silly people, they didn't know what they're talking about. Well, we don't either, but we need to give ourselves the space to do it. So reducing stigma, I think, is naming the way we act as human in the human condition when these new things happen, giving ourselves space, centering the lived experience, and really understanding to what extent is privilege and power informing the hegemony of the way that we have these conversations.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kit. And wondering whether you want to pick up, Kit, as well. If we've talked about the community empowerment element there and the stigma, how do you look at it from a workplace perspective? So in your day job as a CEO, kind of looking at that with your own stuff, how do you encourage use? How do you think about guardrails? How do you think about all of that in the context of being a CEO?
The guardrails for me are the values of the organisation, right? The guardrails are about the culture we set in ourselves, right? The guardrails are about having conversations, if I can be really honest, about control. The assumptions we have as managers about what that means for control. And I love the fact that I said to Beth in the chat, you know, that we have these organisations that do the heavy lifting and the thinking of it. You know, I get the easy idea of just working out how to apply them, you know. But for me, even this morning, our team were talking about this event and we all started talking about AI and people started revealing that they've all got these free accounts, right? Oh, I didn't know you had it as well. It's the same conversations my mum had at school when the pill came out. Oh, do you use the pill as well? So, you know, it's the same things again. It's about giving ourselves permission to talk about it. And I think if we do track fear in our organisations, about AI. The problems are not about the fear of AI. The problem is about the culture that you've got in your organisation and letting your workers be who they are, and the fact that they've got to hide some of themselves and live in that sort of shame. That's the bigger problem to me than the fact that people are using AI.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Thank you, Kit. I think we all wish we worked for your organisation.
No, you don't. It's a chaotic commune, mate.
No, but it's such a lovely way to approach it. So thank you. Michael, I might have throw to you. There's a question, you might be able to pick up a couple here, but there's a question here from Wayne Hawkins, kind of talking about guarding against the inaccuracies in Gen AI created information, whether you kind of saw that in your research and what the perceptions were. There's also this fantastic conversation going on in the chat. Please, everyone, keep it up. There's a great one there from Catherine as well around kind of thinking about how educators are catching up with this whole Gen AI. So I don't know if you want to pick, if you take both of those.
Yeah, well, I mean, so our survey didn't ask, it didn't get into the nuances of how people are thinking about the outputs. I mean, it did ask questions about, do you trust generative AI? Do you think it's going to be more a positive or a negative for Australian society and so on? And there were some really interesting results from that, and particularly again across those demographics that I was talking about before, differences in people's positions depending on their life experience. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, I think this again is it's one of the sets of knowledge and skill, the ability to know if what you've actually produced with generative AI is actually quality, and that can be either simple or complex, because if you ask ChatGPT to create a whole essay for your university assignment, then you're going to have to you don't necessarily know whether or not what's being produced is accurate or not. But I do think we have to I think we have to have a bit of a Wikipedia moment with this. And what I mean by that is we've kind of been trained to not trust Wikipedia. Like, we've had a generation of teachers who have taught students never to use Wikipedia because it might be inaccurate. And I think they've been so successful at that, actually, that, this very powerful resource, which is Wikipedia, gets underutilized sometimes and doesn't, get the credence it deserves. And I know plenty of professors who go to Wikipedia first to, get an initial jumping off point on a topic. So I think the key thing for me is if we just, recognize that what you produce with generative AI is a jumping off point, and that you absolutely need to be carefully reflecting on what you've produced, and you need to not rely on it, then it can obviously be very, very productive. But look, as someone who teaches university students, I'm just as challenged as everyone else with the questions around where's the fine line between, okay, it's absolutely fine, I'm happy for you as a student to summarize notes using ChatGPT, or to help you to summarize an academic article into the key bullet points in the article. I'm fine with that, but I'm not fine if students just want to produce their whole response using ChatGPT. So there's a fine line there somewhere that we need to work out how to deal with, for sure. Teachers at all levels, whether you're teaching in early years of education right through to tertiary education, are all very much challenged by this, I think, and it's something that we're all going to have to work out how to deal with in the coming years. It may very well obviously change how we do things like assessment, right? And I hope it doesn't mean that we end up putting everyone in exam rooms with pencils, because that's the only way we can determine if it's their work, right? I hope that we find better, authentic ways to do things like assessment, which, so that we can measure students' abilities and knowledge in those authentic ways and where they're not just using ChatGPT or whatever.
It's amazing. Thank you. And I love it. We need our Wikipedia moment. That's absolutely true. Thank you, Michael. There's a comment in the chat that pick up to build, I guess, on what you were saying, Anisha, as well as Kit, from Russell, who's talking about neurodiversity, but just, you know, how amazing Gen AI can be as a tool to help potentially, Russell saying here, embrace and articulate their thoughts, brilliance and insights. And as the father of 2 neurodiverse kids, I can see that, and it's an interesting piece because on one hand they're expressing in a really beautiful form, but to Kit's earlier point, sometimes if you're trying to lobby government or you're trying to create change, it needs to be written in a certain form, otherwise people aren't going to necessarily listen. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Kit, and maybe Anisha.
And I'm going to just reflect on Michael's comment, because with all respect to the amazing educators in universities and TAFEs and RTOs and schools, you know, who are under increasing pressure with we just need to call that out. It's not their fault, right? It's not their fault, right? We have to look at ourselves as part of the system and understand how do we give people spaces to relearn and reframe for themselves their work. You know, my favourite human is an educator, so as well. David, I completely forgot the question you were asking.
No. So I was picking up on this kind of point of neurodiversity, and again, it's kind of you're not cheating by using these tools. This is a way to potentially to be able to express your thoughts in a way that those receiving it may better understand.
I'm back there. Sorry.
Oh, good.
So for women, so I'll just go to my own experience. So for women's organisations, talking to power and advocating for equality is an ongoing piece. It's an ongoing project, right? And so often talking to those systems of power has a code. Yeah. Minister briefing, speaking in, you've got to speak to the policy. I think I am, I'm not sure. Or you need to code it or talk about it in the form of a budget. I mean, BP3, everyone reads the budget papers from cover to cover, don't they? No one. No, who does that? Who's got time? So for those organisations, for those small organisations who just have a budget, etc., it's really about the opportunity to you use Perplexity, you know, please tell me or give me an example of a budget briefing paper that I could use that might, and they go, bang, 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 and you have a think about that, you look at that, and then you might go to your mate Claude and you'll dump in all the knowledge and things that you want to say, and it'll come back and Claude will say, like you would if you had your government liaison team, you know, because everyone's got one of them in their wing of their big 17-story organisation. You ask Claude, you say, Claude, you know, this is what I want to say. And my prompts go for ages, right? I'm delegating, okay? And it'll come back and it'll say, well, you could do this, 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 and this. And then I'll go and have to think about that. And then I will write my own. And because I'm a shocking speller, and I often do things at 11:30 at night, I will put it through Grammarly. So I think for me, it is literally the research department. It is the government relations department, and it is doing a level playing field. I compete against people like Oxfam. I shouldn't be competing. I shouldn't even be using that, but I do, because we have competitive funding models. So I think for my neurodivergent friends, it's the system that makes them disabled. So I am totally for anything that's going to break down those barriers so that they can be happy and be who they are in this beautiful world.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kit. Anisha, I don't know if you want to pick up on that point of kind of the use of the tools. I know I do it myself, saying please write me a letter to X in this tone because I want this outcome.
Yeah, well, David, I was just thinking about Kit's examples about how it can include those neurodiverse people, that it's not their fault, it's the system fault. It's so true that AI has become not only AI, but digital tools have become so much revolutionary. It's like there's no way going back. You have to push yourself forward if you want to be a part of this digital world. So I think, as Russell mentioned, that we accepted the use of spell and grammar checking, and then another invention happened using speech and this text and voiceover, and then people started using that, and again another social media thing. So it's gonna always increase their extension of AI development. So I think it's really under the people who are disadvantaged, not due to the systems, but also the digital thing. I think it's really important to bring all of us together and just walk through the world of digital.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
That's what I think.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Anisha. And I think it can be. And there's a lovely comment here from Alicia in the chat saying equitable access to education and working and volunteering opportunities can be scaffolded with the use of AI tools. Literacy and digital literacy still need to underpin all of that. We're getting very close to time, but I might just ask for some final comments. I know we could keep going for another few hours here, but maybe just a couple of final comments from each of our panelists, just for a minute or two maximum each. And there's been so much conversation going on in the chat, so thank you very much for that as well. But I might go around our panel just for any final comments to Michael first, maybe then to Kit, and finish with Anisha.
Well, I mean, it's just pretty hard, isn't it, to kind of sum up and make final comments about such a wide-ranging and wonderful conversation and all of the amazing insights from everyone in the chat as well. I think I would just double down on saying that when we're talking about generative AI, it's absolutely about those broader social, cultural, economic things. It's not just about the nuts and bolts of the operational features of something like a generative AI. So when we're doing education around these tools, we need to get to that point of teaching about those things as well.
Fantastic, Michael. Such a good point, and as you've talked about, such a journey for educators to go on in this space. So thank you, and thank you again for all your contributions. Kit, any final thoughts?
I'm kind of resonating with Michael about the challenge of summing up such a rich conversation, which has been enlivened, I think, by the great participants and their sharing of their experiences in the chat. I think what I would do, though, is say that I'm kind of ending this conversation in this moment being quite enriched and invigorated by the capability in the work that ADIA is doing and the group of people that ADIA is bringing together. Through the chat, I've learned about organisations I had no idea about before. So I want to thank that, and just thank Michael for his work, Anisha for sharing your story, David for facilitating what could potentially be a chaotic conversation, but ADIA for holding the space for all of us as we go on this journey and struggle with what those deeper meanings as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Kit, and thank you so much for all your contributions today. And Anisha, would love to hear any final thoughts or reflections that you have.
Yes, it's been wonderful, David, and I feel I'm going to take so much knowledge home from Michael, Kit, and all the chat boxes filled with meaningful interactions. I would like to sum up by appreciating all those migrants who come to Australia, who give their all to Australia. So using that AI tools could really help them elevate their skills and they can contribute to more. So again, by educating people about AI, again, building trust, I would really resonate on Kit's and Michael's opinion about addressing their concerns. And also, I would like to add one more thing is really using that simple language that would be really appreciated when you're interacting with people who comes from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, just being mindful of that. So yeah, by that we can help overcome their fears and embrace AI as our valuable tool of improving lives. And besides that, we all are exploring, we all are learning. So all the best.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anisha, and thank you for your really, really rich contributions today. Thank you so much. And I think that is a lovely message to end on one of empowerment and recognizing that amazing talents that we have across all of our communities. I'm not going to attempt to kind of wrap it up any more beyond that, because it has been such an amazingly rich discussion. So much great conversation going on in the chat as well. I'm going to have to pause for a moment after this and go back and read all of those comments properly. So thank you very much, everybody, for your really active participation today. A huge thank you to again to Michael, to Kit, and Anisha for being so generous with not just your time, but sharing your experiences as well, and being so genuine with all of that. So thank you very much. Invite everybody to absolutely stay connected with ADIA. If you haven't already, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. We'll be sharing the recording of this session. I think somebody asked, do we share the chat comments? We don't necessarily. So if there's some comments on the chat that you're really interested in, please take a chance to copy them down before we conclude this session. And finally, a huge thank you to Caitlin and our team and the ADIA, who has pulled all of this together for us. Caitlin is hiding there in the background. Without Caitlin, none of this would happen. And to Kit's comment, there she is. Thank you, Caitlin. And to Kit's comment before about creating the space, this is really what it's about, and the amazing work that Caitlin and Nishtar do to facilitate these is very much appreciated. So from my perspective, thank you again very much, everybody, for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you again, everyone.